Well, hello and welcome to another video by Financial Learning. On today's video, we're going to talk about Core Scientific. They just put out a press release after hours on the heels of their earnings. This is a deal between them and CoreWeave. It's an expansion to the already existing relationship. So without further ado, let's get right into it. All right, this press release came after hours, just about 5 minutes after they released their earnings information. And you can see here that they are expanding their total contracted HPC infrastructure by CoreWeave by approximately 590 megawatts. And this is going to be critical IT load at 6 of their Core Scientific sites. We're going to look at some of the investor presentation slides from the earnings to actually show what type of forward guidance, what type of revenue is expected to come from this new press release. So let's continue reading a little bit of this. So new agreement boosts total projected revenue to $10.2 billion over a 12-year contract term. They actually give a run rate per year of what that revenue looks like. But let's continue through here. So it says Core Scientific, leader in digital infrastructure for high performance computing at scale, today announced an expansion of its relationship with CoreWeave, an AI hyperscaler. The new agreement brings an additional $1.2 billion in contract revenue across Core Scientific's Denton, Texas location, solidifying Core Scientific's position as a premier provider of application-specific data centers for HPC workloads. Let me stop right there. Core Scientific is one of the first Bitcoin miners to actually come out with a solid relationship announcement. They have this CoreWeave company who is a major hyperscaler, and they're already locking in some significant revenue numbers by pivoting over to this HPC infrastructure. So continue on, the 70 megawatt of additional contracted power at the Denton site increases full critical IT load to approximately 260 megawatts. The agreement increases CoreWeave's total contracted HPC infrastructure with Core Scientific to approximately 590 megawatt across 6 sites. So they're adding the 260, so it's going to give them a total of 590. We believe this addition aligns with CoreWeave's growing need for robust, high-density infrastructure to support NVIDIA GPU operations. I'll continue on. Here's some quotes. We are thrilled to deepen our relationship with CoreWeave as we continue developing large-scale HPC projects that power advanced AI and other low-latency workloads, said Adam Sullivan, their Chief Executive Officer of Core Scientific. By expanding our capacity in Denton, we're building one of the largest GPU supercomputers in North America, reinforcing Core Scientific's leadership in delivering high-density, high-performing digital infrastructure. We look forward to delivering even greater value for both our customers and shareholders. So this is major. After hours, the share price was looking very positive for Core Scientific between their earnings information and this specific press release. My personal opinion is this press release has a lot to do with that price action. But we'll take a look at the earnings in just a second. Not going to be a full review, but just want to really focus in on the HPC side of it. But let's continue on. This latest announcement further positions Core Scientific as a leader in the high-performance compute data center space. The company is actively seeking additional sites to expand its HPC hosting capacity. With over 10 billion potential cumulative revenue with CoreWeave, we believe Core Scientific is strategically positioned to capitalize on the growing demand for energy-dense, application-specific data centers. Under the terms of our agreement with CoreWeave, with respect to this additional 70 megawatts, Core Scientific is responsible for funding 104 million of the additional required capex, which comes out to 1.5 million per megawatt. The CoreWeave is responsible for the additional capex associated with the expansion. Company also retains the option for 2 additional 5-year renewal terms. So this is a 12-year contract term, but they have the option for 2 additional 5. So it could be up to 22-year term with CoreWeave on this specific HPC deal. With its 1.3 gigawatts of contracted power, Core Scientific plans to provide a total of approximately 900 megawatts of gross capacity for HPC hosting to support alternative compute workloads. Based on geographic proximity to major cities in fiber lines, the remaining 400 megawatts of contracted power is currently allocated to support the company's Bitcoin mining process. So again, this is what a parallel path company looks like that still continues to operate in the Bitcoin mining sector, but is able to get some solid relations in the HPC network. Now, looking at some of the other Bitcoin miners that are trying this, sure, they are starting to build out some sites in hopes of getting some large type customers like this to be able to really help support them on a contract basis to help generate that revenue. But I am not seeing as many of these large customers like we're seeing here with Core Scientific. But let's continue on and let's take a look at some of the information they shared during the investor presentation. All right, this first slide is about this CoreWeave transaction summary, about this press release that was just announced. You can see here that it's for approximately 590 megawatts for HPC, and then it is over a $10 billion in revenue across the contract term, which is 12 years. It comes out to about 850 million in annual run rate revenue. So that is a very large, very lucrative amount of revenue for this specific company. If you think about it and put in perspective with some of these other larger Bitcoin mining companies, that revenue, again, is dependent on the price of Bitcoin. Whereas with this HPC type of contract, it is secured and funded revenue. The only issue and concern that the company will have to do is make sure that they are staying true to that contract. They are under contract obligations. They must remain at full capacity in order to be able to maintain this specific relation across the 12-year period. So again, I think it's going to be very important to see as more and more of these HPC hosts come online, how do those relationships stay true with the initial contract? Will we see some contract breaches due to grid instability, or will these specific companies be able to put in the proper amount of redundancy into their operations in order to make sure that they are fully operational and have 100% uptime? And then jumping down into a few other items here, you can see it's a 75 to 80% profit margin. And again, 12-year contract, and the client is helping pay for some of the CapEx and power and utility. So again, this is a good relationship. They are both putting in some initial investments, and then CoreWeave will be helping support Core Scientific on a very nice large revenue basis for the next 12 years. All right, and jumping into this next slide, you can see a little bit of a breakdown of exactly where all this megawatt infrastructure is located, and here's the pathway to this 1.3 gigawatts that Core Scientific is announcing. So again, starting with Austin HPC, they have 18 megawatts there. They have another about 570 megawatts contracted with CoreWeave, another 11 megawatts there in Alabama at one of their HPC data centers. And then there's approximately 300 megawatts of additional power available at existing sites. So again, these could be used for Bitcoin mining operations, or they could be used for potential additional customers. Or if CoreWeave decides to maybe increase that contract amount or create a subcontract, they have that option as well. And they have that last 400 megawatts of potential additional power available at their new sites. So again, they could increase that grid space, that total capacity at some of their existing sites. So again, it's a very large, nice 1.3 gigawatts of HPC infrastructure they plan on having fully energized by 2027. All right, and before we close up, wanted to point out some of their Bitcoin mining metrics. So you can see here, taking a look at the fourth quarter, looking at their Bitcoin. So it is a $37,661 per Bitcoin. That's their direct power cost. And then their operational cost is another $13,374. So their total all-in cost to mine Bitcoin is $51,035 per Bitcoin. So again, that is the break-even amount if Bitcoin continues to move downward, as we have been seeing that trend today. So these are Core Scientific's Bitcoin mining numbers that they just put out in this investor presentation. So it does make sense that they would want to parallel path and get into the HPC side of the business. They have a very solid revenue under contract now, and it's going to be very important. They could potentially use that revenue to help continue to scale the Bitcoin mining operation or continue scaling the HPC side of their business, depending on the customer demand. And the last slide I want to talk about before we close out is going to be their 2024 snapshot. Starting on the strategy side of their business, they signed this aggregate about 500 megawatts of HPC hosting. Again, this is mostly with CoreWeave. And then they refinanced their debt. So they're in a much better debt position in terms of the interest rate and the maturity dates. And then they added another 100 megawatts of infrastructure at their Texas Bitcoin mining data center. And then they're approved for about another 100 megawatts of capacity growth at one of their other facilities there in Texas, and that is going to be used for their HPC data center. And then from an operational standpoint, they mined a total of 974 Bitcoin in Q4. They had an operating hash rate to end the quarter at 19.1 exahash, and they migrated all of their miners from the 2 data centers that were designated for HPC hosting. So they were able to quickly shift all of those to the Bitcoin specific mining centers to make room for these HPC, these GPU processing sites. And they continue to sunset some of their older, less efficient miners, about 4% of their overall fleet. And they signed a lease agreement for one of the existing data centers for another 11 megawatts there for critical IT, so some HPC load at the Alabama site. Looking at their finances in Q4, they had 94.9 million in revenue. Thinking about the amount of HPC revenue that is projected at that annual run rate, that is much more significant than this current amount of revenue. So it's going to be very interesting to see how Core Scientific continues to grow in terms of revenue and profit margin. Looking at the $265.5 million of net loss. Most of that was due to non-cash adjustments. So they did end up with a net loss on the quarter, although they did have some revenue there. So again, it's very critical that they're able to get the HPC network up and running to be able to mitigate the quarterly losses that they are currently incurring. And also $836.2 million in cash. So that is a very healthy amount of free cash flow to end the quarter. And then 23.9 million in digital assets. So they do have that. And depending on how the price of that Bitcoin does end up coming out in the next quarter, they could take a fair valuation of an increase or potentially a fair valuation of a loss on that amount of digital assets. So again, I think it's gonna be very critical to see how the Bitcoin mining companies do that are currently having a HODL balance. Will they see some additional strength on their income statements in the next couple quarters? It's really going to be dependent on the demand of Bitcoin and that price point of Bitcoin in this current quarter. And they do have that zero interest convertible note that they received in this past quarter. So again, we talked a little bit about how they were refinancing some of their debts. They got a zero interest rate debt with a much better maturity date. All right, and that about wraps it up for me, folks. Hope you enjoyed this quick update on Core Scientific. We went over the HPC news, and then we talked a little bit about some of their Q4 earnings. So if you like this video, please consider giving it a like. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Drop a comment. What are your thoughts on Core Scientific? Do you think this HPC pivot is good for them as a business? Love to hear your thoughts. And with that said, hope you all have a great rest of the day, and I'll see you on the next one.